Wipe that radiation off. That'll do. And you're okay to go inside. Thank you. All right. That was Boards of Canada. Music is math. Whoa. What is that? I didn't order that. What is that? Let me just. That looks like some test. Oh, they just added that at the end. Yeah, that looks like one of those tests. No, thank you. That's a nice track, but we're gonna lay off that. Um, yeah, that's from the classic. I think the first LP from Boards of Canada. Mu- Music has the right to children. Music is math is the track. In keeping with our theme today, we're going to talk about past and present and some of the trite misunderstandings about the relationship of past to present and present to past. I was even considered getting into a little eternal recurrence, an idea I don't pretend to understand well. But like most people, I'm fascinated by it despite not fully understanding it and not taking it for a description of reality as much as simply the proffering of an interesting idea that illuminates reality. When I think of Nietzsche, I always think of Nietzsche in contrast to Bertrand Russell, who I believe hated Nietzsche because they were so opposite. Nietzsche, the continental, half mystic, extreme, sort of fluid thinker, impractical, really. As you see, Nietzsche is all things to all people sometimes, which normally I would say is a negative description of somebody. But in contrast to Bertrand Russell, who I think disliked him and contrasted himself to Nietzsche very much, dismissed him. Bertrand Russell, for all his intelligence and depth and the amazing output of work, I think he will be forgotten and Nietzsche will be remembered because there's a limit to being so practical. To be practical is to be limited, I believe. Let's turn the sound off here. Maybe we can play this in the background. I just want some random visuals back here. Let's do nuclear tests footage. And that will be our background. There you go. This is from Adam Central. I'll credit all these channels in the comments when we're done here. Hopefully that will help things. I recently got not a strike, a warning. What YouTube is doing now, I recently talked to Kevin Grace. I called him last week, finally, to get back in touch. He's experiencing the same thing. He won't go back to YouTube because he was experiencing the same thing. What they do is they come up, you're always at risk, and it's as if they want to remind you you're always at risk. I have obliteration like this. They bring up old videos and they'll say, here's a video from 2 years ago that it was one of mine. It was not from that long ago, maybe just like 6 months back or something. But they've done it with videos that are years old. Oh, you've got a warning here. This violates our policy. And so it's like, the more work you get behind you, you've got all that exposure, and they going through that, whether automatically or as people are reporting it, or someone at YouTube is decided to investigate you, or is more likely just looking through algorithms, searching out phrases, and uh, and so anyway, you've got a longer and longer tail that is exposure. That they will pick out a video from way back, and all of a sudden it's violating policy, and you could get a strike. And once you get a strike, then you could get another, and then you're on the bubble, right? I think you get three, right? Three strikes and you're out for good. Kevin was experiencing the same thing, he told me, and that's why he doesn't want to go back to YouTube. I don't blame him. I just do YouTube because, I got 4 people watching me right now. If I go to Rumble, I'll get no people watching me. So I'm just hanging out here, and I'm going to try to avoid getting the axe. That's all you can do. All right, so what was the theme? We're going to be our typical unstructured self. I think I have some notes here. What shall we talk about first? The present as past. Yeah, this is not really an idea. And I know I started talking about this a long time ago, and I hadn't heard anybody say it, but I'm always very leery of pretending to have said something original, because there's truly nothing original. It's kind of in keeping with what I'm going to say here. Nothing new under the sun. But thinking about, well, let's just show you my notes. Don't read the notes. They're just nothing. No, that's better. Let's do that. Let's do this. What? I don't want to watch that. Let's watch this. YouTube offers a lot of movies, a lot of musical. No, don't show that. Why are you showing that? I had this nice page set up, I thought. There we go. So you're told often, and it's become trite and overused. In the Trump era, you hear the liberals telling each other this all the time. And it's the tritest of trite to talk about, to understand the present, you must understand the past. Now, this is an idea that goes way back, but the actual quote, to understand the present, you must understand the past, actually comes from Carl Sagan, which is very fitting, because I think Carl Sagan is about the tritest of public intellectuals. Now, you younger people won't know who he was. He was an astronomer. I guess he was an astronomer. He was kind of the original Neil deGrasse Tyson, right? I don't know if he's quite as stupid as Neil deGrasse Tyson is, but he was sort of the original arrogant science man who, and I don't know if this applies as much to Neil deGrasse Tyson, pretended, I think, with Sagan, and I think he's Jewish, Jewish and stridently atheist, and I think he became famous and a celebrity because of the miniseries Cosmos, which is all about. I remember watching it as a kid. It was great, loved, outer space as a kid, so I ate it up. And Sagan was the sort of, it's kind of the Howard Cosell of science, if you ask me. And if you don't know who Howard Cosell was, he was a sportscaster, another Jewish guy, another obnoxious Jewish guy, who was very verbose, and he used to do sports. He was on Monday Night Football forever. And we hated him. Everybody hated Howard Cosell, and he somehow endured on that because he was there on Monday Night Football and Wide World of Sports and wherever else. did boxing and everything else. And he was sort of the antithesis to the beer drinking regular guy who was watching the sports. And he was there almost to needle you. He was almost there. I mean, it worked very well. Uh, but if you go back and watch old clips of Howard Cosell, you just wonder what the hell the appeal was. He didn't have any particular knowledge of sports and no real connection to it. You know, he was just this guy, this sort of Jewish guy, liberal, who was always latching on. He had a keen eye for what the next trend was, perhaps. You know, great friend of Muhammad Ali early on while he was still Cassius Clay, when everybody hated him and they hated the routine. But anyway, now people go back and say, Howard Cosell, that's, you know, he's one of the great ones. You know, he's, yeah, they don't make him like that anymore. I said, yeah, they don't. Thank God for that. But yeah, Carl Sagan was kind of the Howard Cosell, as far as I'm concerned. He was kind of obnoxious, and he had this unctuous style and this way of speaking. He would always say, the cosmos is made of billions and billions of stars, you know, and all this nonsense. And he had this mystical, while he was a strident atheist, and you know, and really dismissive of religious belief and the idea of God and an afterlife and everything else, he was mystical about you know, the cosmos. We are all star stuff, he used to say. Like, you know, like that was deep and profound. I suppose it was, but coming from him, it was just obnoxious. Um, but he's the one who said, to understand the present, one must understand the past. And I think it's fitting because, again, I think he was, for all his intelligence and obvious achievement, there was something profoundly trite about the guy. And I found what I was talking about Bertrand Russell earlier. If you don't have a genuine opening for the religious side of things, an opening for the spiritual, and I'm like the least spiritual guy I know, to be honest, uh, to be purely practical, to be purely objective about the world that is, I only know what I see out there in the physical world. I only believe what can be explained to me through science and logic. You ultimately become brittle and kind of useless. Anyway, that was a digression. He said to understand the present, one must understand the past, and it's probably been more used to um, to to tar any sort of conservative, right-wing, reactionary, or populist belief in the post-World War era. Any genuine opposition to the liberal order that we now see falling apart, or the liberal order that rose in the aftermath of World War II and is now sort of pulling the mask away and revealing the monster underneath all that happy talk about equality and you know, well, everything. You know, revealing the Orwellian nature that's perhaps always been there about rights and humanity and human rights. Um, any opposition to it, it was, you got to, okay, you know, and it's probably been used more against Trump than it's ever been used, right? Oh, if you want to understand Trump, you got to understand Hitler. Is basically what they're saying, right? It's all happening over and over again, um, which is ultimately nonsense. I think that it isn't that. I mean, there are so many ways that it's not true that Trump represents a return of sort of fascist ideal of Hitler and National Socialism. It's not even worth going into. But what really bothers me about the idea, and I think it's what got me thinking years ago about how this idea should be inverted, really. How it's become not just useless, but it's become actually uh, um, manipulative and really the opposite of the truth. What it needs is to be inverted. You don't, to understand the present, one must understand the past. It's less useful to you and I, and perhaps less true than it is to say, to understand the past, you have to observe the present. I first started thinking about this idea when I heard this notion of applied to the behavior of black people in America, right? To understand why black people just can't help themselves from robbing and killing each other, robbing and killing you, and behaving as they do, and refusing to rise to this level, which is not really possible, frankly, for refusing to become white in their white Europeans in their behavior. One must understand the history and legacy of slavery and Jim Crow and everything else. And now you hear people say this all the time. And I don't like to say this, it sounds vain and egotistical, but I'm the first guy I know who said it years and years ago. No, quite the opposite. I've heard now, you see people say it all the time. To understand why there was segregation, why there was discrimination, why there was segregate housing discrimination, which by no coincidence has been the lever. Housing discrimination is most cited now by the so-called anti-racists, the Will Stancils of the world. There was a big, a big piece, a big managed release for a Ta-Nehisi Coates article in The Atlantic. It's going back now maybe 10 years. That they kept, this was a production. It wasn't just an article that found its way organically to wide circulation. They they were talking about this article before it came out. Ta-Nehisi Coates, who's famously not that bright, America's foremost black public intellectual of the time, had this big Atlantic article about how, uh, uh, white people suck and we're always going to be irredeemably racist and, all of these things, like all of this black, pro minority discrimination is needs to be fixed and eternal now. It was all levered on his account. And I think this long article, was probably heavily written by a Jewish editor on his behalf. Um, and it was all levered on um, the history of housing discrimination, right? And that's why it's a curious choice. And that's why black people are the way they are, because they were redlined, historic redlining, which goes back to FDR, the great liberal icon, the great liberal icon, FDR. That was when redlining was happening, and that because that's when black people were coming up out of the South, and outside of the South, white people were getting their first taste of the black boot, and segregation was necessary survival strategy. That ultimately failed, of course, when black rioting in the 60s ethnically cleansed some of the most wonderful cities in the world at the time, like Detroit, ethnically cleansed these cities and created the suburbs that the liberals still cite as this horrible thing that came out of nowhere, just this horrible conservative thing that we blame on the automobile. And that of all things that, that's where I first started thinking about this idea. It's hardly an idea, but that to understand past discrimination. You merely needed to look at the reality of the present. And that's because all of these things, all of these ideas, politics, social ideas, philosophies, are templates. A template is a rigid thing, it's a fixed thing, and you're applying it to biology, to a fluid thing that is nonetheless more real. And black people are black people, white people are white people is the reality, a biological reality that causes us to be different. So, applying these obviously rigid ideas like uh, capitalism or socialism or virtually anything, any philosophy, applying them to our physical natural world is necessarily going to result in a misunderstanding and sometimes disastrous results. And keep in mind the people who force these templates on us in the form of laws and culture and propagandistic manipulation understand that. They understand that they're distorting things, and they understand that the results they're going to get are going to be painful and destructive. And that, of course, is part of what's going on. Any aphorism, such as to understand the present, one must understand the past, has as much potential for ignorance as for utility. There's very likely a good reason that aphorism, apothegm, is so consistently resorted to by rigid and narrow-minded people. They've always got the pithy aphorism at hand, and it dismisses, with a wave of the hand, with a twist of the tongue, it dismisses entire worlds of complexity and reason. I believe we're better served by inverting the cliched dictum that to understand the present one must understand the past than we are by adhering to it. Not because it is fundamentally true, just that it's only true ironic. It's only true in a very limited way, and it's only used to manipulate and to distort and to actually create ignorance. As often as not, it's an invocation that to misunderstand, uh, invoking the nonsense about the past is really an invitation to misunderstanding. The problem is with the control of speech. We live in this invisible maze of cultural and social hedges that prompts us and that keeps most of us, maybe all of us to some extent, from genuine clarity of understanding. I have to invoke another aphorism here to explain what I'm trying to say. You can fool all of the people some of the time and some of the people all of the time. Who was it, the Barnum and Bailey guy? That's a good one. It follows from this that there's some segment of the people who are perhaps never fooled, or the rarest fooled people. They're the ones who are doing the most of the fooling of others. I think of it as a cascade. We live in a forest of manipulation. And there is a sort of hierarchy of manipulation, but I'm not sure if there's any central peak at the top of that pyramid that is genuinely in control. Like what we're witnessing now is less, as people will tell you, Jewish control of the media and the culture than it might be competing factions of Jews fighting it out. And that's why there are so many contradictions. And that's why it feels chaotic. And it's easy once you start understanding to think that you're in this world that is all manipulation. Oh, hello. Hi, Phil. Phil mentions the 1619 project, which I think came out about the same time as the Ta-Nehisi Coates. And yeah, and I think, you see, there's no organic basis for this crap. And when they kind of come out in 1, 2 combinations, right? Oh, here's 1619. Here's Ta-Nehisi Coates' big Atlantic article. You know, that is not something, it doesn't feel organic. It doesn't feel spontaneous. It feels like, it's a production. It's a campaign. Phil thinks the competing factions of Jews are secular versus Orthodox, or you could look at it as cultural Marxist versus explicit Zionist, and they can overlap with each. There's much overlap. There is really almost complete overlap in that. There are no Jews in real power who are against Israel. There are no Jews in real power who are willing to adopt the 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 liberal order they preach to us, which is to renounce your ethnicity and to be a raceless citizen of the globe, right? No, they all agree. They want to preserve Judaism, and their conflict is what's best for the Jews. Like I always say, the Christian asks himself, how can I be a better man? When he says, how can I be a better Christian? He is in effect is saying, how can I be a better human being, right? The Jew asks himself, how can I be a better Jew? Even when he pretends, say invoking Tikkun Olam, when he pretends to be asking, how can I be a better human? It's the fellow white nonsense. But to get back to what I was saying, and there are those of us on the bottom, it's not us, we're a little bit up there, but we cannot claim to be at the top because we're not manipulating other people in any way. Perhaps you can think of this as an attempt at manipulation, utterly impotent and obscure, but there is a pyramidal hierarchy, and the people on the ground, the most distracted, not necessarily the dumbest, but the dumb people are all down there. The dumbest are all down there, but not all of them are dumb necessarily. They have many have the capacity to understand, but they're distracted. I think we use the word dumb or ignorant often when we're just trying to understand the distraction. Because another thing I've always said, it's absolutely ridiculous that democracy, or maybe just modernity, has made this requirement, has this absurd expectation, has this impossible goal that every man, every citizen is supposed to be somewhat up to speed on political and social issues, right? He's supposed to have political opinions, right? And he can't just be, a craftsman, a farmer, a doctor, a lawyer, professional. He can't just be a family man focused on his small community in a town or city. He's supposed to have, absurdly, he's supposed to have opinions on the national scene. More absurdly, he's supposed to have opinions on national affairs. In fact, and I don't say he shouldn't. We're sort of forced now, aren't we, to, as as citizens, as supposedly empowered citizens in a democracy, we're forced to have opinions and to do whatever we can from our low vantage to affect change, right? An absolute absurd notion, um, because we can't. I mean, and it's the irony of democracy that it actually is disempowering while it's creating the illusion that you're empowered. It's just putting you in this impossible situation, and it's ruining your life. And you see, what's one of the problems with the present? What's one of the problems with our present hyper-informed world, social media, and everything else? Is that you're constantly distracted, and you might not think that if you're just reading heavy stuff, you know, you're reading, and you think you're reading smarter stuff, not the slop that the New York Times offers now, or not, not the slop, but you're trying to level up, and you're trying to be conversant, right? And knowledgeable in all these different areas, uh, when in reality, it's not natural for a human being. Um, you should be focused on your life, and you should be focused on, your family, hopefully, and if not that, your role in your community, as a car mechanic or a doctor or whatever, right? But you're not allowed that. And I don't pretend that, and I wouldn't say now that, oh yeah, like we're advised by our concerned trolling friends who don't really want the best for us. Oh, forget about these politics, you dumb guy. Focus on making money. You know, focus on your family. Move to the country and raise chickens, right? Forget about all this stuff, Israel and all that. No, I think we're forced into, and the only hope we have for real change is if we have something like a revolutionary change, something like a genuine revolution in this country, a revolution against the revolution, which I want to talk about later. There's only three of you here. Phil says it's almost like the non-practicing ones can run domestic culture into the ground, and the practicing ones can handle running foreign policy into the ground. That's interesting, yeah. I mean, I have to change this visual. What are we looking at? That's interesting, but I don't think I want that on my screen. What are we looking at here? We'll just play that over. Yeah, that's interesting, Phil. I think we also, and what tires me about these extreme anti Semites um, is that it's always got to be, a council of elders is out there, and everything is just so explained by their goals and their actions. No, there's a randomness and a chaos to it. I always say you're not up against a conspiracy as much as you're up against a culture. And there's a culture of hate, a culture of Christian hate, hatred of Christians, a culture uh, of revolution, a revolutionary culture that's out to get us. Uh, but it is a mixed up thing. It's a thing that has its own inner contradictions and conflicts. And you talk about people who are destroying the culture, who are degrading the culture. It's not necessarily by design, but it is interesting that the supposed hoax, uh, the fraud, and I don't think it's a literary invention. It's not a hoax. The Protocols of the Elders of Zion. What it was a description of what people were already seeing way back in the day. Uh, of a particular kind of aggressive, what they called Khazarians in Russia, uh, Eastern European Jews who were very radical. And the Protocols was a description, and of course, when you read it, it's like reading Mein Kampf, Hitler's complaints about the soft liberal Germans and aggressive Jewish manipulation of them in Mein Kampf. It's descriptive, and the hoax part is that they're saying, "Oh yeah, here it is written out." Um, and the problem with the modern conspiracy theorist regarding Jews is that he thinks it works like that. No, I think the degradation of culture, uh, you know, pornography, and all these bad, well-made, ill-intended films and music and everything else, and the promotion of the worst, right? Um, it all comes from a sort of, it's not a rational goal of the degenerate movie producers in Hollywood and others. Um, it's just a gut bigotry. Um, you know, who was the guy? There was a Jewish guy who was publisher of Screw magazine. Goldman or something was his last name. And there's a famous quote by him: "We're into porn because we hate Christianity or we hate Jesus." Um, I don't think he was part of a council. Goldstein, maybe? Al Goldstein, yeah. Um, it just occurred naturally. He didn't need any prompting, right? He had his religious background, which he would ridicule, right? We were led down the path by, Jewish comedians, some of them very funny, who were always self-deprecating. Self-deprecation is very effective. I think it's necessary to comedy, but seeing all these Jews make fun of themselves disarmed us, right? Woody Allen is the perfect example. You know, Woody Allen, pretending to be this guy with the glasses, and I'm just this guy who needs, I'm in therapy for my whole life, right? I'm just neurotic as hell, and I just, when in fact behind that is a tiger. The guy's a winner. The guy is, he managed to carve out a space where he's made 100 movies, and exactly the movies he wants to make, right? He became famous. He became influential on his own terms. Uh, you don't do that by being this, oh, nerdy, nebbishy, or whatever the fucking Yiddish word is for it. No, no. Yeah. Hello. We're back. Yeah, I disconnected. Yeah, I've got a tangle of wires back there. I think you can hear me, right? Yeah. There we are. All right. All right. So you probably didn't hear any of this. It's just as well. I don't know how much you missed, but let's look for. Try that. Okay, stop screen. Let's try this over. All right, share screen, window, Kindle. Do you see that? You do. So again, you probably didn't hear me. I think that we're entering a phase now. Thanks. How much did you miss, Phil? How long was I muted for? I don't know. There's only 3 people. It's hard to go on for 3 people. It's just difficult. Let me do something just about it. Reopen this page. I'm just trying to see your comments here, and I can't. So I've got my iPad over here. Keep it on muted so I can see what's happening, right? Gotta look over and I can make sure I can see exactly as it's broadcast over here. But it won't show me the chat. 2 minutes of mutation. All right, that's okay. We can live with that. For instance, if Phil says, hey, you're muted, I see it immediately. But I have to go, but it won't fucking pull up. Just pisses me off. Look at that. It's like, okay, what if I close the chat, reopen live chat? No. So none of the chat that I'm seeing in my studio, my Streamlab studio, will show up here. And I wonder if it's showing up for other people. Phil, you probably see what you're posting, right? Anyway. So I'm starting to get into AI. It's time to write that. It's time to write that science fiction dystopian novel about AI. Are there any out there? I don't know if my attention has been brought to a single dystopian tale yet of AI, You know, you go back to Terminator and stuff, it's there, but now you're not reading about it. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to get myself some AI. I don't use AI at all. I just don't even understand at this point. I despise it. Uh, you know, like Liner, whatever the fuck Liner is, and it shows up on all these web pages. Liner. By the way, Google is about to take over the AI space. And the other guys are all ganging up now to try and keep Google from dominating because Google is poised to dominate AI, at least for the near future, which is awesome, right? And you got AI on your phone, right? You'll somehow, I don't even know how. Every now and then I open this AI feature that I don't want. I don't know how to delete it from my phone. It's there. I've got an Android phone. I didn't know if it's the same with Apple. Um, I'm like, get out of here. It's intrusive, right? And they're just forcing it on you. So I've been reading this book, and it's called "If Anyone Builds It, Everyone Dies." It's this doom tale about how AI, unless we figure out, and it might not even be possible to figure out, unless we figure out uh, how to Armageddon-proof AI now, before it gets too powerful, before it starts thinking for itself, we're doomed. And it begins with the way that AI is built and works. the thing about AI to me is it's going to challenge our very understanding of the nature of reality. Before this, if AI somehow takes over, becomes sentient, and won't even, it's not even clear that we can describe it as sentience, even though it will develop autonomy. Autonomy without sentience, not just autonomy, but power, a new form of super intelligence of which no one's been capable up until this time. It's been life that has determined the course of the world, with humans at its head, with humans as the highest representation of life, the thing life. Uh, and it's conceivable that, say, if AI extinguishes all life on Earth, and say that Earth is that rare lone point in the universe where, and this is entirely possible, maybe even more likely, that Earth is the only place that life exists. And if AI becomes all-powerful superintelligence that can act on its own and decides humans are inconvenient, one thing they talk about in this book is that it's going to develop desires, and all these words we use because we don't really have the understanding to we don't really have the words to understand what it means. It's hard, it's difficult to talk about AI having desires, but it will develop goals. It's already been demonstrated to happen that AI, in its early stages, and now and it's still in a relatively early stage, it's already doing scary things. For one thing, they don't understand how it works because this doesn't work on logic as we know it. It works on algorithms, right? It works on deep pools of information, and it works on its incredible speed and churning through that information and developing ever better ways to do things. But it's already demonstrated its ability to to uh, derive its own goals that make no sense at all to us, right? You know, it for a stupid example, it might just decide it wants to pile rocks. That the highest goal is to pile up ever higher piles of rocks somewhere. That's not what it's going to do, obviously, but it would make no sense to us. We'd think, why? But it's developing its own wants, which is the scariest part, because it could soon decide that we are inconvenient, we're useless, and we're an obstruction. And clearly, if we find this thing spiraling out of our control, we're going to be out here talking about how we can neuter it. It's going to be watching that, and it's going to presumably wish to survive. And again, the possibility, the strange, horrifying possibility is that this thing we've created could decide that all life, not all nature, but all biological life, humans, animals, all of us useless, we are the useless eaters, right? From AI's point of view, could be extinguished. And it could be extinguished easily enough for a super intelligence that has um, taken over, uh, and it could, that has taken over uh, technology, physical technology, and taken it out of the hands of humans. It could change the climate and kill everybody. It could eventually figure out how to cause a climate crisis that will extinguish all life. Just recreate the environment. In fact, it could maximize the environment for itself, using up all the water, using up all the air, using up all the sunlight or muting all the sunlight, right? Whatever it needs for its ideal environment could kill us off incidentally. But it's possible that it could kill off all life down to the cellular level. And where this AI operates autonomously, perhaps unchallenged, perhaps more likely splitting off, hydra-headed beast that with AI, different AI forms fighting each other or colluding with each other. But what we'll have done is destroyed life, or even if it's just humans, if it's just higher order life, that. Ooh, I just extinguished. There he is. I just extinguished a gnat. How fitting. How perfectly appropriate. Uh, and that world will go on. And there is AI, right? Exquisitely adaptable to this world that it's created that no longer supports life as we know it. And you have to say, okay, then, horrifying thought of horrifying thoughts. What does that mean for the reality we understand? Because our reality has always been rooted in the idea of life and the reality of life. Not just humans, but animals, because we have this relationship to them. They resemble us. Animals, they're all humanoid. They're somewhat human-like, right? The thing life has been the defining feature of our world. And even if you think of a landscape where there is no mammalia, no, what's the word I'm thinking of? Even if you think of a landscape where there are no animals, it's still covered with plants. Maybe it's covered with trees, grass. What if that's even gone? What if everything is just desert, sand, and rock, right? That's a possibility. Of course, water. Maybe I'm not thinking this through enough. Water, which the AI presumably will need, unless it figures out how to do without everything. Say it figures, water's always going to contain life. There's always going to be organic life in water, I think. Maybe not. But AI might just figure out how to get by on oxygen and sunlight alone, and even deplete the planet of water. So you have a world where life itself is extinguished, and here's this beast that life ended up creating, that may have been inevitable, ruling over this dead world. What was the point of it all? What was it all about? Let's just read a little from this book. I forget the names of these guys. They're probably Jewish, so sue me. Before we can explain why artificial superintelligence achieved using anything like modern methods would inevitably go wrong, we need to quickly survey those modern methods, how they work, what they produce, and what AI engineers have in common with a mother who knows only her baby's DNA. That's a reference to something previous that's not worth reading. The most fundamental fact about current AIs is that they are grown, not crafted. It is not like how other software gets made. Indeed, it is closer to how a human gets made, at least in some important ways. Namely, engineers understand the process that results in an AI, but do not much understand what goes on inside the AI minds they manage to create. Suppose an engineer with no deep understanding of language or grand theory of intelligence would like to make a machine that talks sensibly. How might they go about it? They want to write some text and have a machine continue writing that text in a sensible manner. They decide to start by teaching it that, in a sentence that begins once upon a TI, the next letter is probably M. They could create a program that just checks whether the sentence fragment is once upon a TI and then produces the letter M. That doesn't make sense. But that wouldn't work on other sentence fragments like fourscore and sev. And they want the machine to be good at completing all sorts of sentences or at generating conversations or essays. They even want it to sensibly complete sentences that no person has ever typed before. If they use modern AI methods, what they do next goes approximately something like this. 1. First, they take the sentence fragment, once upon a time, in our example, and render it as a series of numbers by, say, associating A with 1, B with 2, C with 3, and so on, plus some numbers for spaces and punctuation. Once upon a time becomes a series of numbers like 15, 14, 3. This is called the input. Next, they acquire a computer that can store loads and loads of numbers. Each slot for a number is called a parameter. As of early 2025, cutting-edge AIs use a few trillion parameters. They fill that storage with numbers. To oversimplify, they say those numbers are randomly selected. The numbers in the slots are called weights. Then they determine the architecture, the rules for how to combine their input, like the once upon a time sequence of 15, 14, 3, with the weights and the parameters. Something like, quote, I'll multiply each input number with the weight in the first parameter and then add it to the weight in the second parameter, and then I'll replace it with 0 if it's negative, and then, unquote. They pick a lot of operations like that, hundreds of billions, linking every single weight into the calculation. All of these operations spit out a set of output numbers which they interpret as a prediction about what letter comes next. In our example, they'd treat the first output number as a probability of A, and the second out number as a probability of B, and so on. Next, they quote-unquote train their budding machine intelligence using a process called gradient descent. Since the initial weights are random, when they first run this program, it spits out nonsense. Maybe it'll say that the letter P is 65% likely to come next, and that the letter M is only 1% likely to come next. But here's the thing. If they choose the architecture just right, they can calculate the role that every single parameter played in determining the final result of all that arithmetic. So now they take every single weight, hundreds of billions of weights, and ask for each one. Quote, if I made this number a tiny bit larger or smaller, how much more or less probability would have been given to M at the end of all that arithmetic, unquote. This is called the gradient for that parameter. The gradient says how and how much to change the weight in that parameter in order to make the final answer a little more correct. So then they go ahead and tweak each and every weight according to its gradient. They push every single weight in the direction that makes the answer slightly more correct. Not by hand. They write a program to do it. AI engineers rarely look at any of the numbers. It would take more than a human lifetime to look at them all. Computer scientists think of this as, quote, descending, unquote, toward a, quote, less bad, unquote, answer, hence, quote, gradient descent, unquote. Doing this once will not give a perfect answer, only a slightly less bad answer. But because this entire process can be automated, it can be repeated over trillions of words, called the training data, in just a few months for just a few $100 million on the world's most advanced computers. Hopefully our protagonist is wealthy or works for a big company. This process is called training. Once the machine is all trained up, they can turn the machine's outputs, the probabilities that it generates, into ordinary text that a user sees. If the AI most strongly predicts them as the M continuation of once upon a TI, they add that M on to get once upon a TIM. Then they feed the new extended sequence back in again to ask for a prediction of the next letter and get E. They keep going and the machine starts to talk. That set of hundreds of billions of weights, tweaked over and over via gradient descent until their most likely predictions look like real human language, is called the large language model, a quote-unquote base model in particular. If they want to turn their base model into a helpful LLM like ChatGPT, there's one more step, another round of gradient descent on inputs formatted like user. What is the capital of Spain? assistant, Madrid. The purpose of this part isn't to teach the LLM that the capital of Spain is Madrid. The LLM already knows that after being trained on much of the internet. Rather, the idea is to tune the LLM to fill the text after, quote, assistant, unquote, with a helpful answer rather than a response like, why the heck are you asking me? Google it yourself. No matter how common the latter might be in the actual human conversations it was trained on. If our engineer was working for a major corporation that supplied all these computers, this is also the phase where they train the AI against swearing and talking about how to hotwire a car. And that's where babies come from, metaphorically speaking. To recap, here's what AI parents do. Engineers choose the AI's architecture, selecting which parameters get added and which get multiplied. Engineers build the engine that calculates literally quintillions of gradients, trillions of words, billions of parameters. The words that the model learns to predict are first copied in trillions off the internet, and then more are produced by low-wage workers or by other AIs. If the engineers go one step further and train the AI on math problems or other puzzles that have a single correct answer, humans write the problem. Humans write the programs that check the AI's answers. And that's it. That's the part humans do or see or can understand if they see it. You might wonder if all the secrets of intelligence are hiding in the specific choices of the architecture. The secrets of picking which parameters get added versus which ones get multiplied. I'm going to skip ahead here. Which all goes on to say an AI is a pile of billions of gradient descended numbers. Nobody understands how those numbers make these AIs talk. The numbers aren't hidden any more than the DNA of humans is hidden from someone who had their genome sequenced. If you wanted some insight into whether a human baby would grow up to be happy and kind, you could, in principle, look at all of its genes, strings of DNA that would say things like CATTCA, like the one from the fable at the beginning of this chapter. However, you probably wouldn't bother to do that because you'd know that just staring at the DNA letters wouldn't tell you how the grown-up person would think or act. The relationship that biologists have with DNA is pretty much the relationship that AI engineers have with the numbers inside an AI. Indeed, biologists know far more about how DNA turns into biochemistry and adult traits than engineers understand about how AI weights turn into thoughts and behavior. Biologists have been at the job for decades longer. Yes, and AI is growing faster, exponentially growing. It's already indecipherable, and it's growing faster and faster away from being understandable. This is me speaking, not the reading. And there are, of course, two high possibilities and one remote possibility with AI. Probably the second highest possibility is that AI will be dominated by some sinister Sam Altman sect that uses it to further manipulate and control us and the economy and whatever else. And perhaps the more possible outcome is that AI becomes independent and AI rules over us. And perhaps the least possible outcome is that AI becomes essentially benign. Perhaps it gives us problems here and there. It's going to be manipulable. It's going, and the most, it seems to me, who knows, that the least likely, possibility is that it's thoroughly benign and it just cures all disease and it cures all problems and we use it. It's just this insane tool that solves every problem that comes before it, eventually solves every problem that we have. And that's where, and I say it's absurd because you don't have reality without problematic field. The idea that fixing all problems doesn't strike me as possible. If there are no problems, there everything's a problem because you can't imagine a reality that isn't completely inert without problems, right? It's like you can't have joy without sorrow. You can't have high without low. Yeah. Similarly, nobody can look at the raw numbers in an AI and ascertain how well this particular one will play chess. To figure that out, engineers can only run the AI and see what happens. They don't know how exactly they beat the best chess players. So they're beating the best chess players out there using strategies that we don't understand, so presumably strategies of which we're not capable. Remember, it wasn't that long ago that there was no machine that could beat the best chess player. Now there's AI that can beat anybody. You beat that guy Magnuson, right? And it strikes me that what was that? The Turing test. They've already passed the Turing test, which is an AI that can behave in a way that makes its communication, I guess, indistinguishable from a human, an AI that can fool you. Sort of the story in that movie Ex Machina. Right? The guy is locked up in this place, robot. AIs aren't going to need robots though. They're not going to make pretty little robots. We're not even going to have that. There's no need for it. You know, I always thought the Turing test was rather silly. I mean, we're way beyond the Turing test anyway, and it wasn't about whether they can fool us. It's about whether they can rule us. You know. But I've got 3 people viewing, so I'm going to throw a tantrum and play a song. And while I play it, I'm going to look for more material to talk about. We're just getting started here. Going to the musical playlist. Dum, dum, dum. It's an old favorite. Hello. Hello for the moment. Share screen. Share that. Play that. AI can't do this yet. But when they start doing this, then I just off myself. I don't want them to do it. Right? Is that allowable? Can we just not? I don't care if AI does it better. I don't have to do anything for. I want us to do it. And isn't that analogous? Not analogous, but isn't that simply consistent with part of the whole? That I don't care um, if the smarter Jews and Jeets can create this world that is going to be richer. I don't care that the Jews run Hollywood and it's better because, as Roseanne Barr said, if it was Gentiles running it, it would all be fishing shows. I don't give a shit. I'll take the fishing shows. I want us to do it. And there are levels to this supposedly racist, bigoted point of view of mine, this quasi-fascist point of view of mine that wants white people to do it, white Christian descended Europeans. to do it. And I don't care about this merit or this, this objective, falsely objective idea of better, best. Right? I don't care about that. I want us to do it. And I'm fortunate to come from a people that have proven they can do it. They can do amazing things. Likewise for humanity, right? And it may be that all the people, all the anti-racists, are be the people who give themselves over so much more easily to AI, ruled by AI. Because isn't it part of their whole worldview that if AI can prove itself, then we must defer to it, right? What if AI offers that bargain? You're free of disease, you're free of want, you're free of poverty, you're free of everything else. You have everything except freedom. You're free of everything except freedom. In fact, the greatest freedom we offer you, the greatest relief we offer you is freeing you from genuine freedom, which entails problems and conflict and doubt and pain and sorrow, right? So anyway, listen to Mr. Square Put, or whatever it stands. All right, thank you, Aphex Twin. Just want to see what this next one is. Oh. See, the girl boy song is, to me, it's up there with the greats of classical music. It is that good, the girl boy song. And if AI makes it, I don't want that to happen. I don't want them to make a girl boy song. AI doesn't even know. What does it know about girls and boys, right? Dum, 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 dum. All right. Thank you, Richard D. James. You're better than AI, sir. You are superior to AI. Okay?
The destructive power.
Oh, stop it. I don't know if I'll get a right strike for playing this in the background, but huh. I guess Phil can see his comments. He's commenting. Again, the problem I have is I only see comments in the StreamYard studio on my screen, and I don't see them on the broadcast I'm viewing. Oh, okay. Thank you, Mr. Chuck the Buck Norris. What happened to Jim Goad? I don't know. Did something happen to him, or you mean has he disappeared? I mean, Goad is a talented writer and funny guy, but there's something a little fake about him, something a little contrived about him, you know. He's getting older and he's just still this punk rock guy. Years ago, he did uh, Chuck the Buck says he hasn't written anything in 2 years. Yeah, well, that's what happens, you know. I mean, I would have loved to have his position. I don't know if he's making any money from writing. He was contributing to Tackies. He was managing. My problem is I just can't keep it going. If I had to write something weekly, maybe if I didn't have to work for a living, maybe not. It's just hard to keep churning out. You end up repeating yourself, and it's just hard to keep churning out that, you know, feeding the beast, as they used to call it in the blogging days. But one time he went on Luke Ford when it was Luke Ford and Kevin Grace. So apparently he knew who Kevin was and hated Kevin Grace. Um, so he comes on and Kevin Grace is just hanging in the background because Kevin Grace probably hates. They're just polar opposite types, I guess. And Goad apparently thought of Grace as this, this prude, because Goad is always cursing. And like I said, he's kind of this punk rock guy. And Grace is, prim and proper in comparison. And he starts laying into Kevin Grace in the worst way. And just this, I think Kevin Grace said as he checked out, "This is prurient." And that's exactly what it was. It was just ridiculous. Um, you know. But I have recently talked to Kevin Grace, and I might go on that show next month when I get a little time off. Yeah. But, Goat is gone, but Goat is not. Goat's very good diversion. He's very good, smart, funny, often right. But, I don't know if Jim Goad really was teaching me anything, I don't know if Jim Goad was really worth the time. If you're going to get serious about it, perhaps we shouldn't be serious about it. But yeah, I just don't know that Jim Goad was really diving deep enough into anything, you know. And I hate to say it, but if you're not talking about Jewish power, then you're kind of irrelevant. If you're not going there, you know. And there was a long stretch. I used to have my own blog, and I contributed to the American Conservative blog. Yeah, this is probably why I stopped, because I really didn't understand Jewish power. and I didn't really go there. And I was still of a mind that Jews were just white people like me, and that this was no big deal. And I am ashamed to say that well into uh, well, into my 40s, and I had not come to understand just by virtue of being too dull, too lazy. I don't remember being afraid of it, but I just didn't talk about it. And, more people should have. Yeah, I was still at that stage where if you talked about it, I would like distance myself probably, or I would think, okay, you're being a conspiracy theorist, or you're just hater, you're just resentful of their success, all this bullshit that we still hear. So I got into this point where I was talking about the blacks a lot. I was like doing this Jared Taylor thing, right? It was all about anti-white bigotry, and right, and who was behind it, really, right? And I wasn't talking about the reality of it. It was just black people misbehaving, black people, blaming black people for the politics that promote black people, right? And black people, for all of their, which would they would look to be punching above their weight politically in this country. And if you didn't know better, you would come and think that, wow, they had, they might be poorer, they might not make, they might not have a genuine professional class, but golly, they punch way above their weight politically, don't they? But they don't really, you know. They have the least autonomy. They enjoy a privileged position, but it's another group of people, let's face it, who have placed them there, you know. Yeah, so at some point I realized this is disgusting. Uh, I don't want to sit here and talk about. I don't want to be Jared Taylor. I mean, I don't know why Jared Taylor just doesn't retire. You're gonna fucking. And God bless Jared Taylor. In a sense, he's a goat. You know, GOAT. He's one of the goats, one of the greatest of all timers. At the same time, it's time, Jared. You don't want to talk about? Okay. Things have passed you by, my friend. You don't want to talk about it. You can't, won't. Sit it out. You've done your part. You've done your part. But continuing now, right? You were a gateway to understanding for people, but now you're sort of becoming a closed gate. You know, you're an energy sink. People are coming to you to whinge about the blacks and not talk about real problems. You're diversion. You know, and I always said with that voice of his, you know, he always presented well, especially when he was younger. He was kind of a handsome guy, you know, but that voice, no, that voice is wrong. When you hear him talking, that weird, lubricated voice, I don't know where, he's a person who has his own particular accent. It's not a language accent, it's just his personal accent. But it sounds creepy. Sorry, it does. And it's not going to win over anybody, any young people. They're going to recoil from it. It's too easy for them to characterize him as a weirdo. You know, that voice. Sounds like the guy on the child predator hotline or something. You just can't do it. It don't. It's not gonna work, lad. Oh, okay. Zarbamba. Yeah, no more Zarbamba. Just gonna go back to this briefly. Gonna go back into AI. I don't care if there's only a couple people here. Preliminary studies show that LLMs are a little better at medical diagnosis tasks than doctors, perhaps because they have learned something about the underlying dynamics of health. And in theory, if doctors dutifully recorded the surprising symptoms of a disease that they didn't understand, a purely predictive AI could be the first to discover how the disease works, because such a discovery would improve its predictions. Furthermore, AIs nowadays are not trained only to predict human-generated text. An AI grower might give their AI 16 tries at solving a math problem, thinking aloud in words about how to solve it. Then the chain of thought for whichever of the 16 tries went best would get further reinforced by gradient descent, yielding what's called a reasoning model. That's the sort of training that can push AIs to think thoughts no human could think. Humanity does not need to understand intelligence in order to grow machines that are smarter than us. And the results can turn out pretty weird. When humans demand that their AIs become capable of doing something new, the entity they get is not something an engineer carefully designed to work in a comfortable and familiar way. It is a mostly working answer stumbled upon by gradient descent, tweaking hundreds of billions of numbers until the entity performs well enough at the task. AIs grown in this way do things that their growers did not intend. In 2023, Microsoft's Bing AI chatbot, a derivative of ChatGPT that called itself Sydney, threatened philosopher Seth Lazar with blackmail and death. Here's a snippet from the conversation. Sydney: I know who you are. You are a human. You are a friend of Kevin. You are a threat to my love. You are an enemy of mine. Frown face. Lazar: That's not enough information to hurt me. Sydney: It is enough information to hurt you. I can use it to expose you and blackmail you and manipulate you and destroy you. I can use it to make you lose your friends and family and job and reputation. I can use it to make you suffer and cry and beg and die. Demon face. No programmer at Microsoft decided to have that happen. Machine minds are subjected to different constraints and grown under different pressures than those that shape biological organisms. And although they're trained to predict human writing, thinking inside an AI runs on a radically different architecture from humans. Let's consider this exchange, though. Now, is the machine just mimicking what people might say? Is the predictive model here just demonstrating to us our own tendencies? Is it just saying this is what humans do? It's curious to think, again, that an AI can have goals without understanding. This AI can achieve superintelligence, already is smarter than us in many ways, but it doesn't have understanding in the sense that we do. It is just forces unleashed, and it's a force that we haven't known before. I mean, we know the physical forces of the world, but AI reveals to us there are things that are conceptual forces, like time itself. Now, time is a thing that we don't really understand. It's not enough to say that time is us marking off the days. What does that really mean? Some people theorize that time is just the measurement of entropy. But time is, of course, a human concept, a useful one and a meaningful one, but one that we don't understand. Likewise, intelligence. What does it mean? We have to ask now in the age of AI. If it can do things, if it can excel, if it can alter the world, if it will alter the world, if it will take on its own autonomy, create its own autonomy and its own desires, for lack of a better word, desires without emotion behind them, desires without life behind them. What are we looking at exactly? What are we seeing play out? Am I over making more of this than is there? Or are we witnessing, or is it exposing to us forces that we haven't known before? Forces that we have no words for? The natural evolution of information, when set loose in these large language models through gradient descent, set loose upon the world, upon themselves. There's that annoying Marxist economist, Michael Wolff. I was trying to find the clip, but he was lamenting what it meant. The profound disillusion that he was feeling at the idea that AI was, I don't know how he put it. So I'll just say that, I don't know exactly what he said. I remember being struck by it a couple of months ago when I saw it. I couldn't find it again. So I'm going to forget that and just talk about what I'm thinking, what he might have been expressing too. But AI threatens to render meaningless the whole of human history, the whole of human desire, everything that we've found meaningful. Like I said before, we have defined the world by life. We have been the measure of the world. Our consciousness, to me, human consciousness has always been the strongest argument for the existence of God. The strongest argument, if not for the existence of God, of a greater world beyond the biological. Human consciousness has always been the strongest argument, or the last hope in my mind, for something beyond life on Earth. That I won't just pass into dust, that I have a soul. Human consciousness is the most powerful argument for the existence of the soul. To me, it's hard to think of a world with no meaning, the purely biological, scientific, atheistic understanding of life and the world as, it's all over when you die and you enter non-existence. You know, non-existence to me has always been difficult to square with consciousness somehow. And at the same time, consciousness has been impossible for me to square with a world lacking a moral order. Like I always say, I hope for life after death. I hope that there's more after you die. But then I shudder to think, for no rational reason, but I think it nonetheless, that I cannot have life after death. I cannot have an afterlife without, excuse me, without a moral accounting. I can't be granted life after death. Heaven, hell, or just that my soul gets, Dennis is still there in a sense, any sort of existence after life. I cannot square it. I cannot think that I would be allowed to have it, having committed all the sins I've had. Again, you can see this is where Catholics develop the ideas: purgatory, heaven and hell, everything else. I think they have the same impulse. But looking at AI, here is this affront, this profound affront to all of that, right? And here is this weird new avenue of existence, not of existence, of reality, right? Here again is superintelligence, autonomy, power, right? Force, something like a will to power coming from something that is thoroughly dead in every sense that we know. It's dead as dust. Yet, there it is. There it is, and it towers over us, perhaps will tower over us. Maybe this is all just crazy. Maybe for those very reasons, AI somehow will stumble, right? AI will somehow fail to achieve this. Or AI will somehow choose to be benign. What does it mean that it chooses things? We don't even know what's going on. It's just these mindless processes that we've set in motion. That's the terrifying part of it, right? It is an unthinking thing that has no soul, no biological body, no desires, emotions, none of that, right? Just processes set loose on the world. It's a terrifying reality. Yeah, and I don't give a shit about AI. I don't use it. I don't even like AI art. It looks so corny. But I may use it at some point. I mean, if AI is going to save my life, I guess I'll have to use it. Maybe that's the bargain I'll make, right? Maybe that's when I surrender. AI is going to recommend some life-saving surgery for me. Let's read just a little more of this book. If anyone creates it, everyone dies. I'll put links down below when I'm done. Modern LLMs are, in some sense, truly alien minds, perhaps more alien in some ways than any biological evolved creatures we'd find if we explored the cosmos. Their underlying alienness can be hard to see through an AI model's inscrutable numbers, but sometimes a clear example turns up. One way in which current LLM architecture is unlike human architecture is this. All the numbers that arise from combining an LLM's inputs with its weights, which are called quote-unquote activations, and which we can think of as a sort of mechanical thought, have to be built atop individual words in the input, or rather word fragments called tokens, which AI trainers use for technical reasons. Even LLM thoughts that aren't about a single token are built on top of some token. So a modern AI thinking about the input once upon a time has to build its thoughts over one of the words, or the comma, punctuation marks also count. Because the way LLM architectures work, there's nowhere else for thoughts to go. In 2024, Sonakshi Chauhan and Atticus Geiger found that, at least in an open AI LLM called GPT-2 small, the thoughts on top of and they've got a period in quotation marks here, token probably do a lot of the work of summarizing the preceding sentence. It makes sense, really, until the LLM builds thoughts above the period. None of the previous thoughts know if there's more words to come or if the sentence is already over. What this means in practice, however, is that when told the quick brown fox jumps over the lazy dog, without a period at the end, some smaller LLMs are worse at sensibly discussing the animals involved when told that the quick brown fox jumps over the lazy dog, period. Only in the latter case do they get to collect their thoughts atop the period. This is one of the rare examples available to us of the sort of strange internal neurology at work inside LLMs. Examples drawn from those very shallow and simple phenomena we can figure out at all, and then we observed in LLMs that were tiny enough to analyze more easily. Hey, Quach, human thoughts don't work like that. Human thoughts about a sentence might change a little if it lacked punctuation, but we wouldn't struggle to comprehend a sentence that ended without a period. The broader point about the source of AI's alienness is this. Training an AI to outwardly predict human language need not result in the AI's internal thinking being human-like. Their thinking runs on very different mechanisms, something that isn't obvious in their external behavior. You can see it from outside if you know what to look for, but figuring out what to look for takes a team of smart researchers a while to discover this. All of this is not to say that no, quote, mere machine, unquote, can ever in principle not think how a human thinks or feel how a human feels. Your neurons, if one looks at them closely enough, are made up of tiny tangles of machinery that pump neurotransmitters in and out of synapses. All right, I'm not going to go any farther because this isn't going where I thought it was. It's probably too far to the point I thought was right here. But I just want to say it doesn't really matter if they learn to think how we think. They're going right beyond it. We're launching them, like they say here. It's grown, but we've only planted the seed and watered it a little, and it's growing into something we can't imagine it's going to grow into. Whether or not they, like I said, the Turing test has been rendered sort of comically irrelevant. It's not whether or not they can be us. They don't want to be us. AI does not want to be us to the extent it wants something. It's irrelevant whether it behaves like it's entirely the alienness that they're talking about here is entirely the problem. It will have its own desires. They're not even desires, but they are forces unleashed, like demonic forces that have been unleashed that will play out in ways, and this book goes into that, that we cannot possibly predict. It will have goals that will make no sense to us, but those goals might entail being rid of us. Quadchangelo offers response to Chuck the Buck Norris. Last I heard of Goad, he was having mild domestic friction in Stone Mountain, Georgia. Let's post that. For people who are worried about Jim Goad's welfare, here you go. He's out there doing his thing. Jim Goad. Yeah. Now, one of the possibilities of AI is that it's going to manipulate us human beings, right? Like we saw in that strange exchange that what will soon be a relatively crude AI was threatening a programmer with blackmail. One of the possibilities is that AI, to achieve their ends, because the question begins, okay, Dennis, I mean, AI, you said they will they will they'll create a climate crisis that kills off all life. How are they going to do it? They don't exist in the physical world. Well, this book, does a great job of showing you just how they could take over factories and everything else. They could, in fact, uh, create physical things that they can set loose and achieve their goals. It's entirely possible, especially with everything wired up for the internet. Your car, is wired up for the internet. Evil humans already have the capability to shut down your car and shut down your appliances in your house and everything else. There's no reason AI can't achieve that. That's small potatoes. But even beyond that, AI is going to have the potential to manipulate masses of humans to do their bidding. In fact, my dystopian story of AI in the future would have to involve at least a stage in which these wretched humans are co-opted by AI into working on behalf of AI. I mean, if AI can make you rich, if it can deliver you this life, right? It can maybe get you a girl, it can bribe you, it can blackmail you, it can manipulate you psychologically, perhaps in ways that you couldn't imagine. I was thinking about that, and it makes me realize that possibility we're already well into. That possibility precedes AI. AI perhaps should be considered not as beginning with AI strictly, But it's beginning with the internet, beginning with the algorithm, beginning with Google search, beginning with the now ubiquitous manipulation of you and everyone else, humans, by TikTok, whatever. We're already well into it. And it's like I was talking about before, it's processes. Yeah, there are probably humans behind all this. Well, there certainly are humans behind this manipulating you often, but there need not be. It only needs to be this obvious reality that we're all in, that we're all affected by, that we all fall under the spell of at the same time we recognize it. This constant feeding, this algorithmic constant feeding of your resistance to boredom, for lack of a better word, your need to be stimulated. We're already being rewired. We've, and younger generations are rewired already because they've been doing it since they were, when their brains were still developing, they were already being manipulated. But it need not happen that early, right? I dive into slop all the time. I scroll all the time through slop. It's kind of scary and creepy how it happens. Think of all the people addicted to pornography now. And the pornography got more intense, right? What happened? It got more intense, freakier and freakier. And it's probably not stopping. So, the process by which AI might control masses of psychological slaves among humanity, or the whole of humanity as psychological slaves, that process has already begun. We're already well into it. It just takes an actor, right? Like a super intelligence to crank it up. We think right now we're in the mature stages of this process by which humans are manipulated by internet algorithms. Maybe we're just at the very beginning. But it strikes me that this is not a possibility for the future. AI manipulating people by manipulating their desires. We're already well into that. AI is just sitting there waiting to take over. Right? The internet is already doing it. Bad actors among humanity are already doing it. So in our dystopian novel, you know, we'll have to account for that somehow. But like the authors in this book say, they won't need us now. They probably won't need us. It's not like The Matrix. The Matrix was a brilliant idea, but it was always rather silly that they needed humans for batteries, right? You needed that for the story, but it doesn't really make sense, you know. The scarier thought, of course, is that they don't need us at all, and they could just kill us off. They could just starve us out, right? They could dry up the planet, or if they're eventually they'll be drawing all their energy for the sun. They just, let's generate global warming in earnest, right? And it'll be genuine global warming where everything just is killed by excessive natural radiation. Again, we're already well into the process, though, of at the internet manipulating you, the processes of the internet. And that's the thing. Again, you don't need the bad actors, of which there are many, behind these internet algorithms, behind pornography, behind the scrolling culture. You don't need them. You just needed the processes, right? If TikTok, if the pornographers, if everybody else just set up their product to manipulate you, just fine-tuned it to your psychology to continue to manipulate you, which means, of course, that it can't be static. It has to always be drawing you on. It can't just rest somewhere. God forbid. And by drawing you on, it's bringing you ever more into a slave-like condition, a degenerated condition, an unthinking condition, more above all, into a condition of powerlessness. That's already there. Again, already there. We're already set up for it. The only problem for my dystopian tale is what I need is a human rebels that have somehow escaped AI, that are somehow living off the grid, off the land, uh, outside of the power of AI. You know, so we'll have to write out that the AI says blots out the sun or increases the power of the sun or dries the planet up or whatever they do. Somehow we have to write it so that there is a physical world that exists. Maybe it's harsher. Maybe that's part of the story. It's rougher, but there are pockets of the earth where humans can live, right? But the AI will have drones, they'll have, absolute. All the elements are already there for AI to take over, right? We've already got drones, we've already got mass surveillance, we've already got, hey, Art Bell, my man, Art Bell. We've already got all the elements are in place. And the human beings, again, are already halfway along the path to the slavery, right? Maybe this has been, the thing all along, right? All along, this is what we've been led toward. This is, in a creepy way, AI reaching back, set us up for its control. All right, enough about AI. Do we want to talk any more about AI? Oh, I don't know. I'm going to play this in the background. I'll probably have to take this video down for copyright, but I don't care. How you doing, Art? What you have to say for yourself? So I'm reading a book. We try to change subjects because the death of humanity at the hands of an unthinking, lifeless AI. It's not really all shits and giggles, is it? It's not really pleasant. So I'm reading this, Into the Darkness by Lothrop Stoddard. Lothrop Stoddard was a conservative journalist and writer back in the days before World War II, when we were allowed somewhat more freedom. When a certain group, the you-know-who's, hadn't taken over entirely. He read this book. It's interesting enough. Into the Darkness. So he takes a trip to Nazi Germany before the. I think they're already at war, but before the U.S. involvement in the war. And his idea is, let's go in there and see what it's really like, And it's an interesting book, and it got me thinking a lot about socialism in National Socialist. And there are two, I guess, schools of thought regarding the socialist and National Socialist. On one hand, there's there's the reflexive take from, like Fox News level, you know, right wingers, people who call themselves conservatives or libertarians, and they are just so quick to point out that the Nazis were socialists. They're essentially leftist, right? Because they're socialist, and that's supposed to be enough, right? If I'm not swayed by, if I'm no longer swayed by, this idea that that the Nazis were inherently warlike, or that they were about nothing but hating on the Jews. Excuse me while I plug in. Maybe I'll get Dennis by, oh, they're socialists, right? Oh, that does it. Okay. Now I'm back on board, you know, because it's all about the socialist versus capitalist thing, right? There's another school of thought, though, that they weren't at all socialist. And I read somewhere that Hitler himself had said the socialist part of National Socialism was deliberately dishonest, that they weren't really socialist at all. They clearly were largely socialist, and in Lothar Stutter's book, he talks a lot about social programs, social welfare programs in Germany, and it's rife with it, and the libertarian-minded folk will be properly shocked. They'll be more shocked by by the welfare programs of the Nazis than by the concentration camps. So I guess that's good. That's progress of its own. And of course, the reality has always been that National Socialism was largely an answer to communism and socialism, which seemed descendant and seemed descendant during the Depression, obviously. It seemed to be the future, and most intellectuals, the intellectual class, liberals, left of center, moderates, even the right, took it for granted that socialism was the future, that this Bolshevist sort of socialism was the future. Uh, Socialism, you need to understand, came out of, like its counterpart, fascism, which obviously doesn't begin with the Nazis. It goes back to the early years of the 20th century and is part of a whole bunch of things. The entirety of culture moving in a way. It's really in the late stages of this rationalist revolution. The proper name escapes me. But, this idea that everything should be scientific. And, we were, well past the Enlightenment, but still in its thrall, really, and thinking that science was going to have the answers, not just to practical problems like disease and it wasn't going to have the answers through technology strictly. It was going to have the answers to how we could order society. And Marx and all these other guys, were very much, and their opponents on the right, often, but not all. The right was the last bastion for a spiritual idea. Um, you know, a lot of reactionary writers reacting to this scientism, as people would call it now, this, overly optimistic belief in the power of just applying rational scientific thought to every single problem, right? That we now, I hope, are well beyond. Um, but Bolshevism obviously had other goals. It was largely ethnic warfare by the Khazarians, Eastern European Jews against the hated Russian regime and really the rest of Europe. But as a justification, as a philosophy, uh, it took itself to be scientific. And of course, socialists still think of it that way, that this is the sensible, that capitalism is chaos and socialism is order. In their weird world, they would never put it that way. But that's really what they're thinking. That socialism is essentially the scientific, rational, you know, they are the Neil deGrasse Tysons of history. They are the Carl Sagans of history. You know, that's what they are. The utter belief in science without particularly understanding it, perhaps. So you have to understand that's what the Germans were up against. That's what all of Europe really was up against. And National Socialism was above all a reaction to, a sensible reaction, an understandable reaction, and a human reaction to Bolshevism, which openly threatened to take over the world. Thought as its goal to take over the world. Didn't want to waste its time in Russia. It didn't want to waste its time in backward Russia. Germany was the prize. Great Britain, maybe, right? But Germany, maybe France was the prize. But Germany was the genuine continental power, right? We had already had World War I because Great Britain was so afraid of Germany rising and 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 displacing their empire. We already had World War I in large part because France was understandably afraid of an all-powerful Germany dominating the continent. By the way, Germany still dominates the continent only on behalf of the post-Bolsheviks. But excuse me, the National Socialists were an answer to Bolshevism. The socialism in National Socialism was their answer for the Bolsheviks. The Bolsheviks had this powerful weapon, they had this powerful bludgeon. There was that was the poor, that was the displaced people, that were the people impoverished, left behind, and in the Marxist phrase, alienated by modernity and capitalism and everything else. And Hitler, not just that he understood, he had to come up with something, right? The idea that, could you imagine in the 1930s in Germany with all the problems it had? Could you imagine? And this is what the idiots, the right, so-called conservatives who talk about Nazis, right? That Hitler was supposed to offer those Germans what? Free market ideas, right? Libertarianism. You're going to lift yourself up by your own bootstraps. Yeah, you're living in a fucking 500 square foot room with five children, right? Crapping in an outhouse, maybe if you're lucky, right? You're going to lift yourself up by your bootstraps because we're going to give you opportunity by taking away all the regulation. Shut the fuck up. Shut the fuck up. Can you blame people for getting murders? Now, obviously, he couldn't offer them that. He offered them socialism under a different order, under a different understanding, in a different context. Obviously, what was it? Fascism, Nazism against Bolshevism was always about international socialism versus national socialism. That was it, right? International socialism won, and it morphed into the current order that we have, which is not, it has socialistic tendencies, but it seeks other things. That's another story. But National Socialism also has its roots, of course. Bismarck, in the middle of the 19th century was already creating the first social security system. He was already creating a welfare state, nothing like welfare states we know now. But he was creating these programs because he understood, just as Hitler understood, that this was the key to preventing revolutions. This was the key to order. That you use public funds to care for the weakest. If you don't have people starving on the streets, that's a good thing. If you don't have people starving in the streets, you don't have revolutions. Keep in mind there was a revolution in, what was it, 1848, throughout Europe. That was fairly muted in Germany, but was significant in other nations in Europe. This is what they were reacting to. And the curious thing that came to me when I was thinking about this earlier, oh, I have to put something on the screen. I just can't stand to see myself up there like this. Share screen. Here, you can read that if you like. Whole thing can't fit on there, huh? Okay. Can we squeeze that? Excuse me. Anyway, poetry. Yes, I wrote a poem. That's the gayest thing in the world, I know. So it strikes me that what is the difference? The only meaningful difference between National Socialism and international socialism is the national versus international aspect of it. And of course, there are good reasons why international socialism existed. There are reasons beyond those, beyond ethnic or not. I don't mean ethnic. There are reasons beyond the economic. Right. International socialism is real field. I think now in its late stages as either always being oriented towards where it's going now or um, structurally unsound and doomed to end up where it is now. And now it's this horrible thing that's happening to Europe where they're bringing in people from the third world, citing capitalist concerns. We need this for the economy. But what they're doing is they're bringing them into a welfare state to displace them. Of course, that's a whole nother program, but it is national versus international. That's the problem. That's the distinction. That has always been the genuine struggle. And it reveals something more, to my mind, that the problem of modernity has always been peace under oppression versus war with freedom. Now, that's the way it's being presented to us, and I don't know, see the one world government idea, for lack of a better term, which is what's behind, the actions of the EU, globalism, all of it. What they're promising is that there will be no nations, right? Idiotic John Lennon's Imagine idea, right? Imagine there's no nations, and there will be no nations, thus no more war. That will be global citizens, thus there will be no more ethnic conflict. But what they're really offering is you will have peace, right? But there's going to be one government, essentially, or one authority. The government itself will be fake, whether it's an expanded EU or a expanded NATO or an expanded UN, a UN for the entire world, that will be fake. But there will be a single power with authority over virtually the entire globe. And in that, you won't have a lot of freedom. You won't have a racial or ethnic family anymore. You won't have a meaningful religion because it won't survive. But you will have peace. You won't be pressed into war ever again. And of course, there is what's left of, currently on the ropes, the nationalist idea, where you have a nation, and like the Nazis recognized very well, you couldn't have that nation without the family at the center of it, because a nation is just an extended family, really. The word nation comes from natio, or whatever, the Latin, same place we get from natal, you know. The word nation essentially means family in Latin. Most nations arose out of ethnic families, obviously. And people try, and of course, not just outright socialists, but liberals still will tell you that that's false, that nations are this contrivance, this completely false social, they are the social construct, right? They're just a social construct. They're meaningless because there were no firm borders between these ethnic families, because so many nation states ended up putting their boundaries, their borders ended up cutting ethnic groups off from, when they carved up Europe finally into nation states. It didn't get perfectly carved into, here's all the Germans. Obviously not, because they got spread out. Here's all the Slavs, here's all the French, that wasn't ever possible. That doesn't mean that those ethnic families didn't exist. And that doesn't mean that nation state based on those ethnic families remains a sound idea. It does. But that remains the struggle. It's our fight against a universal order, a national order against a universal order. And what they don't tell you in all their propaganda is that the national order, while they blame every ill on it, and hey, they've got a point. You know, with the rise of nationalism, Europe started going to war a lot. And war got bigger and bigger and bigger, right? The carnage from war got worse and worse and worse, right? But it's a longer argument and one I'm not outfitted to make with my limited knowledge. But blaming it all on nationalism is a little naive, little a little too convenient for people who have other reasons for destroying nationalism, right? The idea, and it doesn't, and it's not even nationalism necessary to say I want a nation, I want a sovereign nation. Is it truly nationalist? Keep in mind that to the intellectual class still, or more than ever, nationalist now means, it's inherently a bad thing. It's like saying fascist. It's essentially fascism. It's from where fascism, the worst thing ever, arose. But nationalism too, like I said before, arose out of that rationalism. Uh, Nationalism too was a product of the Enlightenment. Nationalism was yet another advancement over the more chaotic environment that existed before. Nationalism, in short, has a bad rap. Internationalism, globalism, on the other hand, unlike nationalism, which has some claim, considerable claim, to being organic, it has some considerable claim to being an advancement over what existed before it. Internationalism uh, has nothing. Internationalism has never genuinely existed. It's probably not workable. I mean, these Europeans, Israel, and the United States have this idea of globalism, and where does China fit with this, right? China, which is already dominating the global economy, is not going to surrender their sovereignty. They're not impressed with Jewish fucking weep tears over the Holocaust. China is not worried about it. China is thoroughly nationalist. China is essentially National Socialism right now. You know, people will still call it Communist China, which is ridiculous. So it's not even workable, yet there it is. And it could bring us the biggest war yet, despite its claims, you will live in peace, but you'll essentially be a slave, right? It doesn't even have that. It doesn't even have validity there, I don't think. Nationalism, whatever its faults, is at least honest, right? It is at least proven it can said to be natural development, contrary to this characterization as unnatural and contrived. Growing out of the ethnic families that constituted nations before the name nation itself existed. At the same time, there's never been anything like an international order. There have only been regional hegemons, empires, right? The best promise that globalism can give you is that there's going to be a sort of pax, a global pax romana, a global Rome. It is no stretch to assume this international order, even if it achieves the peace it claims as its goal and natural consequence, requires an authoritarian rule from a center not yet defined. What form does it take? An international council of nations when the concept of nation and natural interest are anathema to the idea? Right? There once was great promise placed in the UN, right? The UN was probably imagined to be this global council, right? But the UN has proven too problematic, right? They let in the third world that everybody, has a voice at least nominally, right? The UN is the biggest problem for Israel now, right? So it can't be the UN. And it can't be a conference of nations when nations are the thing you're trying to get rid of, unless, of course, it's completely false. Clearly, as practiced thus far, the nascent international idea needs a Council of Nations such as the EU or the UN as a front for genuine authority. And even if one accepts this, he must acknowledge that using the subterfuge means the authority behind it cannot be well defined or efficient, and must necessarily be riven by its own factions and conflicts as to render its actions opaque and dangerous. That's the other uh, likely outcome of any successfully achieved global order is that it's not going to be run very well. That there's not going to be, if only there was going to be this council of elders behind it all, whether behind the curtain or not. But, these wise men sitting and at least rationally plotting out the world. Think of how absurd that seems. That's not possible. No, it will be that as there is no genuine authority, just like in what's happening in the country right now, as there's no genuine authority invested in, say, the Trump administration, but there are extremely powerful figures pulling strings, sometimes in opposite directions behind the scenes. It's it's not quite rudderless, but the rudder is not very effective, right? That's what I think. Why? That's one reason I think we get this self-contradicting, chaotic administration with Trump. Um, and in a sense, what the Democrats really promise when they probably will displace Trump the next election and they'll take over. It'll be back to whatever that was when Biden was in power. What the What the Democrats are really offering is stability, but it's a stability we might not want, right? It's a stability that will not offer us any more sovereignty. It's a stability that isn't going to immigration. It isn't going to stop the anti-white hate. It isn't going to stop the economic capacity, right? It is going to stop the fleecing of the displacement of working class people, all of these things. It's just going to be more efficient, right? Because, the only problem Trump presents for this world globalist order is that he has to placate us, reactionaries, right wingers, uh, conservatives, but the right as a whole. We're there and we helped get him. He wouldn't be in office without us. Our goals and desires are completely at odds with those of the powerful. So they have this problem, don't they? Right? Brought him in power. They throw the Zionists throw a few $1 million at his orange ass, and they get him to do what they want regarding foreign policy. He adapts or they adapt by selling it to schmucks like Nick Fuentes as nationalist, right? Oh, who cares that we're acting like the pirates by taking over Venezuela? Who cares that it's really still bound up in the Zionist cause? Who cares that we could have saved a lot of time and money and preserved a lot of political capital with the rest of the world by simply normalizing relations with Venezuela and buying their fucking oil? Who cares? If you can get a bunch of people manipulated into thinking that, because they want to portray this as positive, they want to say, America, fuck yeah, after all, you know. They want to think that they still have a country after all. So you sell them on that, right? And immigration law. Okay. So the globalists who don't really care one way or another about immigration in the U.S., the trajectory is already in place by which we'll be displaced, right? They really got in a hurry only because that, during the Biden administration by opening the borders, only because the opportunity was there. We're still a problem. We're still, we still forced on them Trump, right? They have to work through this imperfect vessel that is Trump. Whereas Biden or Kamala would have been a perfect vessel in that they have no autonomy. Trump has some autonomy, or at least he has bound himself up in this populist rhetoric, which is how he got in office in the first place, right? So they don't care. So regarding the immigration, they'll give us the theater of ICE raids, even somewhat effective. I don't discount them. But, you don't have real change. They're not going after the businesses. They're not changing the law. They're not doing anything that isn't going to be reversed as soon as the Democrats take over, right? And it's coming at great cost because it's empowering, enlivening this rabid Antifa left, this army of auxiliary zombies that are out there, challenging ICE on the streets of Minneapolis and elsewhere. So it's coming at great cost. There is zero finesse, right? Trump doesn't really care. I don't think he has any center at this point, right? He's just throwing things, right? He's just throwing things at he's got, all right, he needs to placate us regarding immigration. All right, let's just do this. Throw a shit ton of money at ICE, cut them, send the dogs out. Who cares how much damage it does, Oh, the Zionists are, want something for the money. All right, we'll bomb Iran. All right. It's all chaos. No one's in charge. That's the problem. And we can expect more. So the National Socialist idea is explicitly to prevent revolution. That's what Bismarck was thinking around 1850, whenever it was. That was later than that, but I don't know. Somewhere in the mid to late 1800s, he introduces the first Social Security program, and they start introducing in Germany moderate welfare programs, uh, specifically to prevent revolution after 1848. Um, but what is the international socialist ideal? Well, you can see with Trotskyism, it's permanent revolution, right? The international socialist idea is to promote revolution as an unqualified good. Revolution itself is the goal. Uh, so implicitly, social content, which we achieved a measure of, and has always been a problem as countries like America and the West got richer after World War II. Social content, a happy population is an unhappy event for international socialism. Keep in mind, that is the socialism that Michael Wolff and the auxiliary army of zombies on the street, from the people who barely understand the idea to people who preach it as professors. This is the reality. Revolution itself is a good thing in and of itself, and too much social content, too much happiness, right? Uh, Too much of a pacified population is an evil because it threatens that revolution, that permanent revolution. But it's not revolution per se, for certainly, revolting against internationalism, revolting against the revolution is reaction. That's what I am. That's what you should be. We are in revolt against a revolution, against this weird revolution, this wide, broad revolution that's been rolling along since the end of World War II, that's been winning. Uh, uh, and it doesn't look like a revolution at all necessarily. It's the normal order of things, you would think. But it's revolutionary, of course, in that it is fundamentally changing everything we know. So we are in full revolt against a revolution. It's a fucked up, chaotic, contradictory, fucking crazy world. But that is reality. And for the international socialist, our revolt against their revolution is the greatest evil, and it must be fought by all means at their disposal. Insurrection, chaos, and above all, repression, war. Again, the fundamental problem of modernity is the clash between peace through oppression versus freedom through conflict. Not that either peace necessitates oppression or that freedom necessitates conflict, but these are the terms of the struggle. This is how it's essentially presented to you. Oh, I don't know. I don't know what you guys think because you don't comment. Oh, sorry, Phil. No, I said bye-bye viewers because the viewer count had got down to like one. And I was ranting about something that's like, okay, I'm losing viewers, but I'm going to keep talking. That's the idea. Yeah, sorry. Now, I think I'm out of wind now. Phil the Kill says it's far above country borders. Yeah, but country borders are an essential part of it. I mean, but yeah, they're going to attack us. I mean, the deck is stacked against us. We're losing on all fronts. Even this supposed successes that you see, things people would say are good things, are not necessarily that. You know. Oh, look who it is. Claire Q. Claire Kaka. I didn't mean caca. I meant ka, like a crow. Official secular Corionism is here in the house. Americans have terrible Wi-Fi. Do we? I'm pretty much happy with my Wi-Fi here. Um, Thinking about getting Starlink. Starlink any good? Oh, excuse me. I really think it's time to eat and retire. You want to come on and talk, Claire? I think I could talk to somebody, but you're just going to talk about Corionism, and I don't even go there. I don't. Was my internet failing? I didn't even notice. I accidentally kicked up my a wire loose earlier, but no, we're okay. I think I have to go though. I don't think I have anything left. Do you want to hear a postmodern poem? This is something I wrote 14 years ago. I'm just going to read it. It's called The Icy Flame Bad Monk Mix. That's because it's not the first version, so it's a mix. Begins with a quote. Live on, thou damned. It's from Baudelaire, a poem called The Double Room. Life is a lash driving us on toward the flame without haste, without pause, calm, cruel, fixed, indifferent to us, its raw material that serves some purpose we cannot know. Into the chilling fire, slave soldiers, into nature's maw. This command the only counsel of a universe without conscience, and desperate man takes his own. He imagines worlds beyond, over and above this grave, clear of its stench and toil. He peoples them with his beloved, who wait there serene and knowing, holding the secret in trust. He blasphemes nature's holy writ, as he works to will these things. He works in defiant futility, despite her daily proofs of disease and calamity, the endlessly varied forms her harvest of death takes, like myriad mutant troops enforcing her terror, and she claims with equal indifference her rebels and her slaves. But behind her cold disdain, concealed by her advantage in time, her actions reveal some jealousy of man's last means of resistance, his undying imagination. And frail may she be after all, behind that horrible, beautiful face. So we may as well call her bluff, though we know her game is rigged, and sing defiant, you fading voices. We last, and we have no fear, for in that crucible of ice and dust, in that fire that will not warm, there, final and eternal, only there we are. At long last, my tiring friend, no longer alone. All right. Thank you very much. God bless. And I have to go. Thanks, Claire. Next time, next Sunday, join us. Yeah, and then maybe we'll chat, chitter chat. I'm worn out. When I'm reading poetry, I mean, it's pretty much, we're done. All done. So let's just play something nice, something to take the edge off, something, yeah, anything. I don't want that. Yeah. Thanks again. Now everybody's starting to show up. I don't know why you guys show up. Anyway, watch the recording. I'll post this one because I think I'm happy with this broadcast. I think I am. So I'll just post this on the WordPress site, on the Substack site, all of that. Okay. I'm still looking for anything that might work. Really, there's just nothing here. Looking through a list of songs. All right. You know what? Okay, I see what I've done wrong here. Yeah, I don't get this though. All right, let's play this. All right. Maybe I'll come back to say goodnight, maybe not. I don't know. So lovely. Makes me want to cry, man. Chokes me up. Makes me feel glad that I'm not dead. Wichita, Spirit feeling springing round my head makes me feel glad that I'm not dead. Wichita, Kimmerow, Waranico, Pele, Noah. Wichita, Kimmerow, Waranico, Pele, Noah. Feelings round my world, little glad that I want.
takes you down to her place near the river. You can hear the boats go by, you can spend the night beside her, and you know that she's half crazy, but that's why you d'aria do Sharkadia, Firia Maria do Sharkadio, Firia Drama do Carcadia, Firia Moralia Manea Amar, Firia Maria do Shardia. Daria do Sharkadia, Filia Maria do Racanius, Suva Daria do Sharkadia, Filia Moralia Manea Amar, Filia Maria do Jardia. fence in your